I sat by the window of my old apartment, sipping cold coffee. It was my 65th birthday, but instead of being surrounded by family, I was alone. Max, my son, hadn't called again. He'd become distant, his once lively presence replaced by silence. The apartment was full of memories, but none of them felt real anymore. I wondered where I'd gone wrong. I had spent my life supporting him, but now it felt like all that love had disappeared, leaving me with only the weight of solitude. Then, out of nowhere, my phone buzzed. I glanced at the screen and saw Max's name. I almost didn't want to answer. He hadn't reached out in months, and each conversation left me feeling more empty than before. But I pressed the button, my heart pounding despite myself. "Mom, I need to tell you something," Max's voice came through, clipped and distant. "Wedding tomorrow. Sold your car and house. I'm done with you." His words hit me like a blow to the chest, making it hard to breathe. I couldn't process what he was saying. Sold my car? My house? I didn't understand. The house was mine, a place I'd lived in for decades. It wasn't just a building, it was a symbol of everything I'd built for myself, for us. My mind raced as I tried to make sense of it, but all I could hear was his voice, detached and final. I sat there in silence, feeling as if the world around me had stopped moving. What did he mean, done with you? I had always thought that, no matter what happened, Max would still care, still keep some connection to the mother who had raised him. But his words made it clear, he was no longer interested in having me in his life. I had hoped that maybe, just maybe, he would reach out today, of all days, to acknowledge my birthday. I had even convinced myself that he might surprise me with a call or a visit. But no. There was nothing. Not even a mention of it. "Max, what are you saying?" I managed, my voice shaky. "Just what I said, Mom. I'm done. There's nothing left to talk about. I've made up my mind." I didn't know how to respond. The pain was too much. It wasn't just the fact that he had made these decisions without telling me, but the way he had ended it so abruptly. So coldly. It wasn't the son I had raised. The boy I had known would never have spoken to me like that, would never have treated me as if I were disposable. I felt something inside me snap. Maybe it was the years of giving and giving, waiting for him to notice, to care. But it was clear now. He had moved on, and I was no longer part of his life. That I sat there, holding the phone in my hand, unable to move, the words still ringing in my ears. Max's voice was gone, replaced by the deafening silence of the apartment. The coffee in front of me was now ice cold, and yet, I couldn't bring myself to take another sip. My fingers trembled, not from the chill, but from the shock of what I had just heard. The world around me felt distant, muffled as if I were underwater. I looked out the window, but the familiar sights of the street below felt foreign, as though I had been transported to another place entirely. The trees, the houses, the people walking by, they all seemed to exist in a reality that had nothing to do with me. My mind was a jumble of confusion, grief, and disbelief. How had things gotten to this point? For years, I had given everything for Max. I had sacrificed my time, my energy, and my own dreams to ensure that he had everything he needed. I had poured my love into him, endlessly, hoping that one day it would be enough to bridge the distance between us, to make him understand that no matter what, I was always here. But now, it felt like I had been giving to someone who had already moved on, someone who didn't need me anymore. I thought of the times I had spent helping him with his homework, the long nights sitting by his bedside when he was sick, the endless hours of laughter, and even the fights we had when he was a teenager. I had been there through it all, unwavering, a constant presence in his life. And now, it seemed like all of that had been forgotten. Max's life had become something else entirely. It was a life I no longer recognized, a world that no longer had a place for me. Clara, his wife, had never really made an effort to connect with me. She was polite, yes, but there was always a distance between us, a coldness that I had tried to ignore for the sake of family. But now, as I sat there in my apartment, I realized that it wasn't just Clara who had pushed me away, it was Max, too. And the realization hit me like a wave, crashing over me and leaving me gasping for air. I thought about how, when I was raising him, I had always believed that he would remember the sacrifices I made, the love I gave. I had believed that one day, he would appreciate everything I had done for him. But now, it seemed that I had been wrong. All my efforts, all my love, had been for nothing. He had moved on, and I was left here, alone, wondering what had gone wrong. The pain in my chest was overwhelming, a deep ache that I couldn't escape. It wasn't just the fact that Max had sold my car and my house without even consulting me. It wasn't just the betrayal of his words, the coldness with which he had cut ties. It was the realization that my place in his life had been replaced, that the family I had so carefully nurtured had slowly faded into the background of his new life. I had been erased, replaced by other people, other priorities. And in that moment, I felt as if I no longer mattered. I stood up, walking over to the small bookshelf where old family photos sat, gathering dust. I picked up one of the frames, my fingers running over the glass, smoothing the dust away. It was a picture of Max when he was little, smiling at the camera, his arms wrapped around my waist. He looked so happy then, so full of life and love. The memory of that moment hit me hard, and I felt tears welling up in my eyes. How had we gotten here? How had he gone from being that child in my arms to the man who now barely acknowledged me? I wiped my eyes quickly, not wanting to let the tears fall. I had to stay strong, had to keep my composure. But the truth was, I didn't know how much longer I could keep pretending. I had spent so many years being everything for everyone else that I had forgotten how to take care of myself. I had poured all my energy into Max, into my family, into being the caretaker, the provider, the constant. And now, I was left with nothing. I thought about all the ways I had tried to reach out to him over the years. The phone calls, the texts, the invitations to dinner. Every time, the responses were short, curt, and distant. There was always an excuse, always something that came before me. And each time, I told myself that it was just a phase, that he was busy, that things would get better. But now, it felt like I had been fooling myself all along. The truth was staring me in the face, and I couldn't escape it. Max didn't need me anymore. The weight of the realization pressed down on me, suffocating me. I felt so small, so insignificant. I had spent my whole life giving, and now I had nothing left to give. My son, my only child, had moved on, and there was no place for me in his world. I put the photo frame back on the shelf and turned away, walking to the small kitchen in the corner of the apartment. I opened the cabinet, reaching for a bottle of wine that I had saved for special occasions. But today didn't feel like a special occasion. It felt like the end of something, the closing of a chapter that I had never expected to end. I poured myself a glass, the liquid sloshing over the rim and spilling onto the counter. But I didn't care. I didn't care about the mess, or about anything else. I sat down at the small table, the wine glass in front of me, and let out a long, shaky breath. The silence was deafening. I had always prided myself on being independent, on not needing anyone else. But right now, I realized that I had spent so much time convincing myself of that I had forgotten how to be alone. And the loneliness was crushing. As I stared out the window, the streetlights flickering in the distance, I wondered what it would be like to start over. To let go of everything that had held me here, in this apartment, in this life. The thought of leaving it all behind was both terrifying and liberating. But what did I have left here? What was there to keep me? I didn't have the answers, but I knew one thing for sure, something needed to change. I couldn't keep living like this, waiting for a son who didn't want me, for a family that had forgotten me. It was time to take control of my life again. Time to stop being the one who was always there for everyone else, and start being there for myself. It wasn't just about Max anymore. It was about me. And for the first time in years, I felt a small flicker of something within me, a spark of hope, however faint, that maybe, just maybe, it wasn't too late to start over. That I spent the following days in a kind of numb fog. The apartment, once a place of warmth and memories, now felt suffocating. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of leaves outside, seemed to echo the emptiness I felt inside. I couldn't shake the weight of Max's words, the finality in his tone. He was done with me. And somehow, the more I thought about it, the more I realized that I was done too. I was done being invisible, done waiting for someone who wasn't coming back, done living a life defined by others' expectations. The realization didn't come quickly. It didn't hit me like a bolt of lightning, like I had always imagined moments of clarity to be. No, it crept in quietly, like a small whisper that became a voice too loud to ignore. I had spent so much of my life giving and giving, but in return, I had gotten less and less. Now, I had nothing but a bitter taste in my mouth and a heart heavy with regret. Max's departure wasn't just physical, it was emotional too. He wasn't just distant now, he had erased me from his life entirely. I was no longer needed. I had been replaced, and I was left standing alone in the wreckage of a relationship that had once felt unshakable. I thought about the sacrifices I had made over the years, the choices I had put aside for him, for his happiness, his well-being. I had been a mother in every sense of the word, doing everything I could to make sure he never wanted for anything. I had sacrificed my own dreams, my own desires, and for what? To be pushed aside when I no longer fit into his life? I could feel anger stirring deep within me. How dare he? How dare he just toss me aside like that, as if I were some trivial detail in the background of his story? I had given him everything, and now, he had nothing for me. It stung, deep in my chest, and the more I thought about it, the more I resented him. How could he have done this to me? How could he have been so cold, so dismissive of everything I had done for him? But then, amidst the anger, something else began to shift. It wasn't just Max who had failed me, it was me who had failed myself. I had spent so many years bending, twisting, shaping myself to fit into the life others had expected of me. I had poured all my energy into being a mother, a caretaker, a provider. I had defined my worth by how much I could give to others. But in doing so, I had lost sight of who I was, what I wanted, and what made me happy. I wasn't just a mother. I wasn't just someone's wife, someone's caretaker, someone's background presence. I was me. And somewhere along the way, I had forgotten that. I had let my entire identity revolve around what others needed from me. Max's needs, his desires, his expectations had consumed my life, leaving me with little space for my own. And that realization, it stung, but it also felt freeing. For the first time in years, I felt like I had permission to be someone else, someone who wasn't defined by her past. Someone who wasn't tied to the role she had played in others' lives. I could choose who I wanted to be, what I wanted to do. I didn't have to live in the shadow of a life that no longer existed. But it wasn't going to be easy. There was no magic moment that would instantly make everything better. I couldn't just wipe away the years of living for others, of neglecting my own happiness. But I could start. I could start by making small changes, by taking steps toward a new life. I spent the next few days sorting through old belongings, photographs, letters, mementos. Each item felt like a heavy weight, a reminder of the past that I was so desperately trying to shed. There were photos of Max as a child, with his first bicycle, his first day of school, his graduation. I remembered the pride in my chest, the love that swelled up every time I looked at him, every time he smiled. But now, those memories felt like chains, binding me to a version of life that no longer fit. The act of sorting through these things was surprisingly painful. It wasn't just about giving away clothes or tchotchkes, it was about releasing the illusion that Max still needed me, still cared the way he once did. It was as though with each photo I packed away, I was also packing away parts of my past that no longer served me. With each item I let go of, I was making room for something new. The process was slow and emotionally taxing, but as the days wore on, I began to feel lighter, as though a weight was slowly lifting from my shoulders. I could feel the shift inside me, a quiet strength beginning to stir. I knew I had to leave this place behind. Not just physically, but emotionally as well. The apartment had become a tomb of my former life, a place where the ghosts of the past still lingered, reminding me of what I had lost. I needed a change, a fresh start. I made a decision that day, a decision I hadn't even realized I had made until it was already done. I would sell the apartment. I would leave this life behind and start something new. For years, I had told myself that I couldn't afford to move, that I couldn't leave behind everything I had worked for. But now, it felt like the only way forward. There was nothing here for me anymore. I would find a new place, a new life, a place where I could start fresh, free from the weight of the past. I called a realtor the next morning, my hands trembling as I dialed the number. The decision had been made, and now there was no turning back. I didn't know where I would go, but I knew I couldn't stay here. I had to move forward. I had to stop waiting for Max to come back, stop waiting for someone who would never return. I was all I had now, and that had to be enough. It was terrifying, yes, but it also felt exhilarating. For the first time in years, I was doing something for myself, something that wasn't dictated by anyone else's expectations. I wasn't just Max's mother, I wasn't just a woman defined by the past, I was me. And I was finally free to be whoever I wanted to be. That evening, I sat by the window, the same window I had looked out of countless times before. But this time, everything felt different. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the room, and for the first time in ages, I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe I wasn't done yet. Maybe there was still a chance to find happiness, to find peace. The wind outside howled softly, as if echoing my own thoughts. The world was moving on, and I was finally going to move with it. I could feel a new chapter beginning, one that wasn't bound by anyone's expectations but my own. The next few days were a whirlwind of activity, decisions, and emotions. The realtor came by to appraise the apartment, and I felt a pang in my chest when I realized just how much of my life was about to be packed up and sold. The place had been home for over 30 years, through so many seasons of my life, through the highs and the lows. I remembered the early days when Max and I first moved in, when it had been just the two of us. It had been small, but it had been ours. Now, as I sat across from the realtor, nodding as he explained the process, I couldn't help but feel an overwhelming sense of finality. This chapter of my life was closing, and there was no turning back. But the strange thing was, I didn't feel as sad as I thought I would. Instead, I felt a strange sense of liberation. The apartment, once filled with memories, now felt like a weight I was finally ready to cast off. I realized then that I had spent so much time holding on to things, people, places, memories, that no longer served me. I had built my life around others' needs, and in doing so, I had forgotten what it meant to live for myself. Max's abandonment, while painful, had become the catalyst for change that I needed. I didn't know where I was headed, but I knew it had to be away from here, away from the past. The process of selling the apartment was not a quick one. There were papers to sign, contracts to review, and questions I had to answer. But as the days passed, I felt a sense of calm beginning to settle in. I was no longer waiting for someone else's permission to live my life. I was the one in control now, and that realization was both terrifying and empowering. I started packing up the small, personal items that had accumulated over the years: books, knickknacks, old clothes, and photographs. It felt cathartic, each item I packed symbolizing a step away from my old life and towards something new. With each box I packed, I could feel myself shedding the skin of the woman I used to be and stepping into something unfamiliar but exhilarating. It was as though I were rebuilding myself from the inside out. But even as I packed, there was a nagging feeling in the back of my mind. What would people think? What would Max think? Would he care at all that I was leaving? Would he even notice? These questions swirled in my mind, but I quickly pushed them aside. It didn't matter. What mattered was that I was finally taking the first steps toward creating a life that was truly mine, free from the weight of expectations, free from the ties that had bound me to a past that no longer existed. As the apartment slowly emptied, the silence became louder. I realized how much I had come to rely on the noise of my life, the constant background hum of daily routines and the presence of others. But now, the stillness felt different. It wasn't lonely anymore, it was peaceful. It was a space where I could breathe, where I could think without distraction. A week later, the apartment was sold. The deal had gone through faster than I had expected, and soon enough, I was packing the last of my things into my car, ready to leave behind the life I had known for so many years. As I locked the door for the last time, I felt a wave of emotions flood through me. There was sadness, yes, but also relief. I was moving on. Moving towards something new. I had no real plan, no destination in mind. But I knew one thing for certain: I wasn't going to settle for less than happiness anymore. I wasn't going to hide in the shadows of my past. I was going to take the reins of my life and steer it wherever I wanted to go. I drove aimlessly for a while, letting the open road guide me. The landscape outside the window seemed to stretch on forever, and for the first time in a long time, I felt a sense of possibility. There were no more expectations weighing me down. There was no one to answer to but myself. I didn't know where I was headed, but it didn't matter. The journey itself was what was important now. The idea of starting fresh, of creating a new life from scratch, was both terrifying and exhilarating. And for the first time in years, I felt a sense of freedom. I spent the next few weeks searching for a place to call home. I had considered staying in the city, maybe finding a small apartment somewhere else, but the idea of remaining in the same environment, the same life that had trapped me for so long, didn't feel right. I needed something different, something that would help me heal, something that would give me the space to rediscover who I was. After a lot of searching, I found a small house by the sea. It wasn't much, just a modest cottage, but it was exactly what I needed. The moment I stepped inside, I knew it was the place where I could finally start over. The house was quiet and peaceful, and the sound of the waves crashing against the shore outside was a constant, soothing presence. It was the perfect place to begin again. I moved in the next week. The house was empty, save for a few pieces of furniture and some boxes of my belongings. It felt strange at first, walking through the rooms and realizing that I was truly on my own. But there was no fear, no panic. There was just a sense of calm, a deep knowing that this was where I was supposed to be. I spent the first few days unpacking, organizing, and getting the house in order. I made it mine, filling it with little touches that made it feel more like home, pictures of places I had always wanted to visit, a collection of books I had been meaning to read, plants that added a bit of life to the space. For the first time in years, I was doing something for myself, something that was just for me. As the days passed, I started to explore the area. I walked along the beach, letting the salty air fill my lungs and the cool waves lap at my feet. I found a small cafe near the water where I began spending my mornings, sipping coffee and reading. I started to reconnect with the parts of myself that had been buried for so long, my love of nature, my curiosity about the world around me, my ability to find peace in solitude. There was something profoundly healing about being by the sea. The vastness of the ocean reminded me that life was bigger than any one person, any one relationship. It was a constant, ever-changing force, and just like the waves, I too could change. I wasn't stuck. I wasn't defined by my past. I was free to become whoever I wanted to be. It wasn't easy. There were still moments when the loneliness crept in, when I missed Max, when I wondered if I had made the right choice. But those moments became less frequent as time went on. Slowly, but surely, I was finding peace with my decision, peace with myself. This was my life now. And for the first time in a long time, I was ready to live it fully. Weeks passed, and I began to settle into my new life. The house by the sea, with its creaking floors and the ever-present sound of the waves, became a sanctuary. I had started a small garden in the backyard, tending to it with a care that I had long since forgotten I was capable of. There was a rhythm to my days now, mornings spent with coffee and books, afternoons spent in quiet reflection or working on projects around the house, and evenings with the calming sound of the ocean outside my window. The solitude was no longer oppressive, it had become a balm, soothing the jagged edges of my soul. But, of course, my new life couldn't remain untouched by the past forever. Max, and by extension, Clara, would eventually find me. They couldn't ignore my absence for long. I knew they would come back, whether out of guilt or obligation, but I wasn't prepared for the way they would reappear in my life. It started with a phone call from Max. I hadn't heard from him in weeks. The number on my screen was familiar, but it felt foreign in the context of the life I was trying to build. My hand hesitated as I reached for the phone, and for a brief moment, I wondered if it would be better to ignore it. But something in me, maybe the last thread of hope, compelled me to answer. "Mom," Max's voice came through the line, tight with an emotion I couldn't quite place. "We need to talk." I felt my chest tighten. The words I had been dreading, the conversation I had known was coming, had finally arrived. I braced myself, unsure of what to expect. "What's going on, Max?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. I wasn't sure if I was angry, relieved, or something in between. "I've been trying to reach you for weeks," he continued, his tone defensive. "Clara and well, we thought you'd be back by now. You can't just disappear like that. You're family, and we're worried." I paused, taking in his words. Family? It stung, that word, coming from him. The same son who had told me he was done with me, the same son who had sold my house without a second thought. Now, he was worried. "I'm not coming back, Max," I said, my voice firm, but not without a hint of sadness. "I've made my decision. This is where I need to be." "Mom, you don't understand," Max insisted, his voice rising. "Clara and I are trying to build a life. You can't just cut yourself off from us like this. You're not a burden, but you can't just leave and expect everything to be fine. Why didn't you ask me before you made all those decisions for me?" The words slipped out before I could stop them, my frustration boiling over. "You sold my house. My car. You made those decisions without even consulting me." There was silence on the other end of the line. I could hear Max exhaling, as if gathering himself. "I didn't think you'd want to keep those things," he finally said, his voice softer now, more conciliatory. "I thought it would be easier for you to just start fresh, but I guess I was wrong." "You didn't give me a choice," I said, my voice cold, though beneath it, I felt a sadness that I couldn't fully suppress. "You didn't even ask me what I wanted. You assumed I would just go along with whatever you decided, and I'm done with that. I'm done being your backup plan, your afterthought." "Mom," Max started, but I cut him off. "I've spent my whole life putting everyone else first, Max," I said, my words coming faster now, fueled by a mixture of anger and regret. "I've been the one to pick up the pieces for years, for you, For everyone. But not anymore. I'm not going to beg you for attention. I'm not going to beg anyone to love me. I'm done. There was another long silence, this one stretching out uncomfortably between us. I could hear Max's shallow breaths, his hesitation. Then, finally, he spoke, his voice quiet but resolute. I just wanted you to be a part of our life. I didn't want to lose you. You've already lost me, Max, I replied, the words tasting bitter on my tongue. And I've lost you too. We've both lost each other, but we're still here. And we both need to learn to live with that. With that, I ended the call. I felt the weight of it hanging in the air, thick and unresolved. The conversation hadn't gone the way I had hoped, but I knew it was the only way forward. I wasn't going to back down. Not now. The next day, Clara called. Her voice was calm, measured, as if she had spent hours rehearsing the right words. I know you're upset, she said, but we need to talk about this. Max is really hurt, and so am I. You can't just shut us out. We're your family. Her words felt hollow, and for a moment, I wondered if they were really about concern or just about getting back what they had lost. I could feel her manipulative undertones, that subtle pressure to make me feel guilty, to make me believe that my leaving was an abandonment. But I was no longer the person who would apologize to soothe others' discomfort. I'm not shutting you out, Clara, I said, my voice steady. I'm choosing to live for myself. And if that's something you can't understand, then maybe it's time we accept that. I'm not going to let you or Max dictate my life anymore. You're being unreasonable, she said, a sharp edge creeping into her voice. This isn't just about you. You're making everything harder. Do you think this is easy for Max? He's been trying to keep everything together. And now, this? I'm not responsible for his happiness, Clara, I replied, my patience thinning. And I'm certainly not responsible for fixing everything he's broken. The call ended with her promising to think about it, but I knew it was just a way to buy time. They weren't interested in understanding me, they were interested in controlling me. They needed me to be the person I used to be, the one who would fold under pressure, who would make everyone else comfortable at my expense. But that person was gone. I had shed her like an old skin, and I was no longer interested in crawling back into it. Days passed, and the tension between us hung like a dark cloud. I knew they would try to reach me again, and they did. Max sent me a text apologizing for his harsh words, asking me to reconsider. Clara sent me a message as well, asking if we could talk things through. They were desperate, but I wasn't swayed. I had made my decision, and now it was time to live with the consequences. The hardest part wasn't the confrontation or the pain, it was learning to accept that some relationships simply weren't meant to be repaired. And no matter how much I loved Max, no matter how much I had given, there were things that couldn't be undone. The silence in my new home became a constant companion. I had grown used to the rhythmic crashing of the waves outside my window, the endless wind that seemed to whisper secrets to the trees in the distance. But Max's silence was different, he had stopped trying. I couldn't help but wonder if the weight of the conversation we'd had lingered between us, heavy and unresolved. But the truth was, I couldn't dwell on that anymore. I had to live my life, not the one he wanted for me, or Clara, or anyone else. Weeks passed, and Max's calls became fewer. Clara's messages, always polite, began to sound more strained, like a script that had been repeated one too many times. And yet, there were moments when I missed them both. Not because I needed them, but because the distance had made me realize how much I had invested in that relationship. The question kept nagging at me, could it ever be repaired, or was this the final break? Then, one day, the answer came. It arrived in the form of a letter. It was a simple envelope, with no return address, but the handwriting on the front was unmistakable. Max. My heart skipped a beat as I tore it open, a mix of anxiety and anticipation flooding through me. The letter was short, but the weight of its words carried a force I wasn't prepared for. Mom. I'm sorry for everything. I didn't know how to fix things, and I still don't. But I want you to know I've been thinking about everything we've said. I've been selfish. I want to understand you again, and I want us to find a way forward, even if it means taking small steps. I don't expect you to forgive me right away, but I hope one day you can. Max. I stared at the letter for a long time, my eyes blurry with tears I hadn't expected. I had imagined this moment in my mind 100 times, but the reality of it was far more complicated. I wanted to believe his words, wanted to reach out and forgive him, but I couldn't ignore the hurt that still lingered in the pit of my stomach. How many times had I forgiven him before? How many times had I been there, ready to smooth things over, only for it to feel like nothing changed? I walked over to the window, looking out at the ocean as the sun began to set, casting a golden glow across the water. The calmness of the scene contrasted sharply with the storm of emotions inside me. I was torn between two versions of myself, one that longed for reconciliation and the other that feared being hurt again. I had to make a choice, but I didn't know how. The letter sat on the table for a few days, as I struggled with my emotions. The peaceful life I had begun to build here, in this small cottage by the sea, seemed so fragile in the face of his request. I had fought so hard for this solitude, for this independence. Would I lose it if I let Max back in? Was I strong enough to open my heart again, knowing that it might break once more? After several days of turning the letter over and over in my mind, I finally took a step forward. I picked up my phone, my fingers hovering over the keys. I typed and deleted again. It felt impossible, like trying to fit a square peg into a round hole. What could I possibly say to him now? What would be the right words to bridge the chasm between us? Finally, I wrote. Max. Thank you for your letter. I've spent a lot of time thinking about what you said. I appreciate your apology, but there's more to this than just words. It's about the choices we've made, and the space we've created between us. I can't promise that things will go back to how they were, but I'm willing to try. For me, and for you. I don't know where this path will lead, but I'm open to walking it. Mom. I hit send before I could change my mind. My hands were trembling, and my heart raced as I set the phone down. I didn't know what to expect. Maybe he would call, maybe he wouldn't. Maybe he would understand what I was offering, or maybe he wouldn't. But I knew that for me to move forward, I had to take this step. It wasn't about him coming back into my life and fixing everything, it was about me finding peace within myself, about accepting the relationship we had, the one we could have, and letting go of the expectations that had kept us both trapped for so long. That night, I didn't sleep well. My mind kept replaying the conversation, the letter, my response. Would he understand? Would he be hurt that I wasn't offering more? I tried to calm myself, telling myself that there was no perfect answer, no perfect reconciliation. Life didn't work that way. But the uncertainty of the future lingered in my chest, a constant companion I wasn't sure how to handle. The next day, the phone rang. My heart skipped a beat as I saw Max's name on the screen. I picked up on the first ring. Mom, he said, his voice shaky. I read your message. I don't know what to say. I never thought you'd be willing to try again. I thought you were done with me. I could hear the pain in his voice, and it twisted something inside me. I wanted to reach out, to comfort him, but I knew I had to stay firm. The old patterns couldn't return. It couldn't go back to being the way it was. I'm not done with you, Max, I said, my voice softer now, but still steady. But I can't go back either. We both have to work at this. It's going to take time. I understand, he replied quietly. I'm willing to do the work. I just want to make things right. The conversation ended with tentative promises to talk more in the future, but as I put the phone down, I felt a small sense of hope. The road ahead would be uncertain, and I knew that it wouldn't be easy. But for the first time in a long time, I felt like we were both finally seeing each other clearly, no more illusions, no more pretending. It was just us, two people trying to find their way back to each other, despite everything that had come between us. I stood by the window again, watching the waves roll in. The storm wasn't over, but the clouds were starting to break. Maybe there was a way forward after all. But this time, I was walking it on my own terms, in a life that was truly mine. As the weeks passed after Max's call, I found myself in a strange new place. It wasn't the life I had imagined when I first left my old apartment. It wasn't filled with grandiose gestures or bold moves, but rather with quiet, steady steps forward. The work was not dramatic, nor was it immediate. It was a slow unraveling of the tightly wound knots that had bound me to a past that was not mine to carry anymore. I continued my daily routine in the little cottage by the sea. The mornings, as always, began with coffee, a book, and the sound of waves crashing against the shore. The simplicity of it all brought me peace. Yet, as the months wore on, I started noticing the little shifts within me, the internal changes that had once seemed impossible, but were now becoming real. I was learning to embrace this quiet life I had created, one where I no longer felt the constant pressure to please, to perform, or to be someone I wasn't. For the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe fully. The peace I had been searching for was no longer just about physical space. It was about emotional freedom. I had realized that no amount of external change, no new home, no fresh start, would bring me peace until I had learned to find it within myself. The ocean, the quiet, the solitude, all had given me the space to heal. But it was the acceptance of who I was, and what I had become, that truly allowed me to find the serenity I had longed for. I had learned to let go of the notion that my worth was tied to the approval of others, that my purpose was defined by the roles I had played in their lives. For years, I had been driven by the need to be needed. I had spent my days doing everything I could to fulfill the expectations of others, first as a mother, then as a wife, and for a long time, as a person who was merely surviving, always playing the part of the dutiful, self-sacrificing figure who gave and gave without ever asking for anything in return. But now, in the quiet solitude of my own home, I was rediscovering a part of myself that had been lost in all those years of giving, the part that had desires, passions, and needs of her own. I thought about Max often, and about the choices we had made. I knew that the path we were walking would not be without bumps, but I also knew that I was no longer the same woman who had walked away from him in the past. I had learned the value of boundaries, of knowing when to give, and when to protect myself from further hurt. The forgiveness that had once seemed impossible was no longer a distant dream, it was a quiet truth that I was learning to accept, not because Max had earned it, but because I had earned the right to move on. I wasn't doing it for him, I was doing it for me. I continued to send Max the occasional message, updates about the house, about my daily life, nothing too intimate, but enough to keep the door open. He responded with tentative words, as if testing the waters, unsure of what to expect. But even in his awkwardness, I could sense his willingness to try again, in whatever capacity that might be. That was enough for now. I wasn't asking for grand changes overnight. I wasn't asking for apologies or promises. I was asking for understanding and respect, something that had been missing from our relationship for a long time. In the meantime, I had learned to take joy in the little things, the warmth of the sun on my face during my afternoon walks, the quiet of the mornings that I could spend with my thoughts, the books I devoured, the garden I tended. I had learned that peace was not something that arrived all at once. It was something that came in moments. It came in the quiet hum of the world outside, in the steady rhythm of my own heartbeat, in the realization that I was enough, just as I was. But the journey was not without its setbacks. Every now and then, the past would rear its head, and I would feel the familiar ache of loneliness. There were days when the silence felt overwhelming, when I wished that Max were still a part of my life in a way that felt real and meaningful. But those days became fewer and fewer. Slowly, I began to realize that I wasn't just missing him, I was missing the version of myself that I had lost in trying to hold on to him. I was learning to love the person I had become, even if that person wasn't perfect, even if that person wasn't the mother Max had once known, or the woman I thought I should be. One evening, a few months later, I was sitting by the window, watching the sky turn pink as the sun began to set. The air had that crisp edge to it that I loved, the kind that felt like the promise of something new. My phone buzzed on the table, and I picked it up to find a text from Max. "Mom, I've been thinking. I know things have been hard, and I know I haven't been the son you hoped for. But I want you to know, I'm really trying. I'm not asking for things to go back to how they were, but I want to make things better. For both of us." I read the message several times, feeling the emotions surge in my chest. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't a promise that everything would change, but it was enough. It was enough to know that he was trying. And in that moment, I realized something. I had spent so much time trying to control how things would unfold, trying to dictate the terms of our reconciliation, that I had forgotten that sometimes, healing came in its own time, on its own terms. I typed a simple response, "Thank you, Max. I'm trying too." And that was it. There was no grand declaration, no sweeping resolution. But for the first time, I felt a sense of peace. The storm wasn't over, but the clouds were starting to part. The path ahead wasn't clear, but I no longer needed it to be. I was content with taking it one step at a time. As the sun sank below the horizon, I sat in silence, feeling a calmness settle over me, a deep knowing that whatever happened next, I was ready for it. This was my life, and for the first time in a long time, I had peace with who I was, with where I had been, and with where I was going. The days after that text from Max were filled with a strange peace, a serenity I had never fully experienced before. It wasn't the kind of peace that came from having all the answers or from knowing exactly what the future held. It was the kind of peace that came from finally accepting the unknown, from stepping away from the need for control and allowing myself to simply be. I had always been the one who planned, who worked tirelessly to ensure that everything was in its proper place. I had constructed my life based on an illusion of control, believing that if I did everything right, if I gave enough of myself, I could somehow avoid the pain of loss or rejection. But the reality was that no amount of planning, no amount of self-sacrifice, could shield me from the inevitable. Loss was part of life. Change was inevitable. The key, I had learned, was not in avoiding those things but in learning to embrace them, to accept them as part of the human experience. In the days following Max's message, I found myself reflecting on the choices I had made. I thought about the years I had spent bending myself to the expectations of others, trying to fit into molds that didn't belong to me. I thought about the countless sacrifices I had made, the parts of myself I had buried in order to be the mother, the wife, the daughter that others needed me to be. And as I thought about those years, I realized something important. I had lost myself in the process. I had forgotten who I was, what I wanted, what brought me joy. But now, in this quiet house by the sea, I was starting to rediscover those things. I didn't need to be anyone else's idea of what a mother or a woman should be. I didn't need to keep giving until I had nothing left. I was enough as I was, just as I was. I didn't have to prove my worth to anyone, not to Max, not to Clara, not to anyone. I could simply exist, be present in my own life, and allow myself to take up space without guilt or apology. The process of healing wasn't linear. There were days when the ache of Max's absence hit me harder than others, when I found myself longing for the closeness we once had, when I wondered if I had made the right choice in distancing myself. But those days became fewer, and the days filled with peace became more frequent. I began to see the value in my own company, in my own thoughts. I had rediscovered hobbies I had long forgotten, like painting and reading, things I had abandoned in the rush to care for others. I spent hours walking along the shore, collecting seashells, letting the rhythm of the waves calm my mind. The quiet became a friend, not an enemy. And the stillness, once deafening, became a source of comfort. It was in that silence that I began to hear my own voice again, to listen to the whispers of my soul, which had been drowned out for so many years by the noise of obligations, expectations, and responsibilities. The house itself had become a reflection of this newfound peace. The small garden I had planted was growing, as was the collection of books I had stacked up by my favorite armchair. The walls, once bare, were now adorned with photographs of places I had dreamed of visiting, postcards from friends I had made during my travels, and small mementos from the moments that had shaped me. This home, this simple cottage by the sea, was a testament to my own transformation. It was a place of refuge, a sanctuary where I could be myself, where I could breathe and simply exist without the weight of the world pressing down on me. But despite this peace, Max was still a presence in my life. The messages between us continued, each one more tentative than the last. I could feel him reaching out, testing the waters, unsure of how to rebuild the bridge we had both burned. He would send me updates about his life, his work, his family, and I would respond, cautiously, but with warmth. It wasn't easy, but it was necessary. I wasn't ready to dive back into the closeness we once shared, but I was willing to build something new with him, something that was healthier, more honest, and more respectful of the boundaries we both needed. There were moments when I found myself wondering if I was making a mistake, if I was giving too much too soon. But then I would remember the lessons I had learned. I wasn't just a mother anymore. I wasn't just a caretaker, a fixer, a giver. I was a woman, a person in my own right, with my own needs, my own desires, and my own voice. And that voice needed to be heard, even if it meant standing firm in the face of discomfort, even if it meant allowing myself to ask for the space I needed, for the time I needed to heal. Max's messages slowly began to change. They became less about what he needed from me and more about what he wanted to offer. He would ask about my life, about the things I was doing, about my garden and my books and my walks by the sea. And slowly, I began to share more of myself with him, to let him in just a little bit at a time. It was a slow process, but it was progress. One evening, a few months after our initial conversation, Max sent me a text that felt like a small victory. "I've been thinking about what you said. I know it's going to take time. But I'm not giving up on us, Mom. I hope we can take it slow, but I'm here, whenever you're ready." I read the text several times, the words sinking in. I wasn't ready to jump back into the relationship we once had, but this felt like a step in the right direction. We weren't going to fix everything overnight. But we were both willing to try, to be patient, and to move forward at our own pace. And that, I realized, was enough. The next morning, I sat on the porch, the sun warming my face as I drank my coffee, watching the waves crash against the rocks below. I had no grand plans for the day, no expectations, no to-do list. I was simply present in the moment, content with the life I had built. It was a simple life, but it was mine. And for the first time in a long time, I felt truly at peace. The journey wasn't over, and there were still uncertainties ahead. But I had come to understand something important. Peace didn't come from external circumstances, it came from within. And no matter what the future held, I was ready to face it with open eyes, a full heart, and the strength to live my life on my own terms. Months passed since Max's message, and in that time, I found myself stepping further into a life that was slowly becoming my own. The cottage by the sea, once a symbol of my departure, had now become a place of rediscovery. Each day I woke up with the sun streaming through the windows. I felt the quiet sense of belonging I had longed for. It wasn't the kind of belonging that comes from being surrounded by others, no, it was the kind that comes from within, from the realization that I was enough as I was, and that my life, no matter how simple, was mine to live. I continued my walks along the beach, sometimes with a book in hand, sometimes just letting my mind wander. I had begun to explore new hobbies that I had never had the time for. Gardening had turned into an obsession, and I often found myself kneeling in the dirt, lost in the simple joy of planting seeds and watching them grow. There was something deeply satisfying about the process, something healing in watching something flourish from a tiny, seemingly insignificant beginning. But as the days passed, I also began to feel a subtle shift in my relationship with Max. The texts had become more frequent, each one a little more open, a little less cautious. We began to talk, not just about the past, but about our present and our future. It wasn't easy, not by a long shot, but I could sense that he was trying, and in turn, I was trying too. He had apologized, and I had forgiven him, not just because he deserved it, but because I had finally come to understand that forgiveness wasn't for the person who wronged me, it was for me. It was about letting go of the hurt, releasing the weight of anger, and choosing to move forward with an open heart. One evening, as I sat in my favorite chair by the window, sipping tea and watching the sunset, my phone buzzed with an incoming message from Max. His name on the screen still carried a strange weight, but I had learned to let go of the tension that used to come with it. Our conversations had become more comfortable, less filled with expectations, more about sharing our lives with each other. There was no pressure to fix everything in one conversation. We were simply two people, doing our best to rebuild a bridge that had once seemed irreparably broken. The message was simple, but it was enough. Mom, I know I've asked a lot of you. And I know we're still taking things one step at a time, but I wanted to tell you that I'm proud of you. You've done something I never thought you would, you've started over, and I think that's incredible. I hope you know I see you now, in a way I didn't before. I stared at the message for a moment, letting the words sink in. I see you now, he had said. And I realized that, just as much as I had learned to see him, he was now seeing me, truly seeing me. Not as the mother who was there to fix everything, not as the woman who had been his support and constant, but as an individual, with her own life, her own story, her own worth. I sat there for a long time after reading his message, feeling a mixture of emotions. It wasn't perfect, this reconciliation. There were still scars, still remnants of the past that couldn't be erased. But something had shifted, something I couldn't ignore. We had both changed, and we were both learning how to navigate the complexities of our relationship, one step at a time. A few days later, Max called. His voice was different this time, softer, more open, as if he had finally come to terms with the fact that I wasn't the same person he had known. I could hear the sincerity in his tone, the genuine effort to connect in a way that felt authentic. And I realized, in that moment, that this was the kind of relationship I had always wanted, one built on mutual respect, on understanding, and on the willingness to meet each other where we were, without expectations. I've been thinking a lot about what you said, he began. About how we've both been stuck in this cycle. I know I can't change the past, but I want to move forward. I want to build a better relationship with you. I don't want us to keep going in circles, Mom. I want to be real with you. I smiled softly, my heart swelling. I think we both do, Max. And I'm here, ready to try. We don't need to rush it. We just need to keep taking those small steps. Our conversation continued for hours, long after the sun had set, and by the time we hung up, something had shifted. The old wounds, while still present, didn't hurt as much. There was a new kind of understanding between us, one that didn't require apologies or grand gestures. It was simply the understanding that we had both made mistakes, but we were both willing to move forward, one day at a time. The next few weeks were filled with small, incremental changes. We spoke more often, checked in with each other, and shared moments of our lives that we hadn't shared in years. It wasn't always easy, and there were still moments of discomfort, of awkward silences, but they were fewer. We were learning to communicate in ways we hadn't before, and I could see Max opening up, letting go of the defensive walls he had built over the years. One day, I decided to take a trip to the town near my cottage, something I hadn't done in months. I walked through the small streets, browsing through shops, and taking in the sights and sounds of life around me. The air was crisp, and the sky was clear, one of those perfect days when everything seemed to align just right. As I wandered through the town, I realized that this was my life now. This simple, quiet existence, filled with small joys and small victories, was enough. When I returned to the cottage later that day, I sat by the window once more, watching the sky turn to dusk. I thought about Max, about our journey, about how far we had come. There was still work to be done, but we were doing it together. Slowly, gently, we were learning to rebuild. That evening, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. The past, with all its pain and mistakes, was no longer something I carried with me every day. It was a part of my story, yes, but it didn't define me anymore. I had learned to let go of the need for validation from others, to stop searching for approval from people who would never understand me. I had found peace within myself, and that was enough. And so, I sat there in the quiet of my cottage, the sun setting over the water, and realized that I was not the same woman who had left her old life behind. I was stronger, more at peace, and more in touch with who I was than ever before. This was the life I had chosen, and for the first time in a long time, I was content with where I was.